In last week's episode, we talked with Rose Eveleth about cyborgs. Let's see what you had to say. So first things first, as always, when we talk about social issues, I want to thank everybody who had like a nice, earnest, respectful conversation, even if you disagreed, which, you know, this is Idea Channel, it's about discussion. Disagreement is great. It's okay as long as you're respectful. Yeah, I joked a little bit with some people earlier in this week about us making an Okay to Be Smart style t-shirt. Joe has a t-shirt that says, I did a science, where it would be nice if maybe we made some Idea Channel t-shirts that said, I successfully interrogated my preconceived notions, because that's really what a lot of this is about. And, you know, there was some complaint that the title was misleading. You know, the title of the video was why, you know, are we all cyborgs? And, you know, I think actually I'm gonna stand by, and it was actually Morgan's suggestion, and I think that he totally nailed it. And I think that that is what the title of the episode was and should have been. For the reason that, and I want to make sure I get their name right, so I'm going to read for a second. Zoidosaurus pointed out on Twitter that this episode was about what makes everyone a cyborg. And this is something that Rose and I talked about in the episode, is that when we think about cyborg, we tend to think about powerful white dudes that have machine parts implanted into their meat. And the point of our conversation was to figure out what is cyborgian about everyone who does not fit into that mold. And that's what we spent a lot of the episode talking about. It's just that I think a lot of people who come to a conversation wanting to talk about cyborgs come with this idea of what a cyborg is. And so our conversation seemed beside the point because they were unable to interrogate that preconceived notion. So for everybody who did do that, and for everybody who tried to do it, I just want to say thank you. Boss 1000 on the subreddit gets to, I think, another important part of this conversation, which is, you know, we tend, I think, to consider this type of thing as a sort of byproduct of stories and fantasy and empowerment, but really, especially with technology becoming so available and the understanding of our bodies becoming so much more complete and like personal and political, that this really does turn into a community question, a question about who is what. And I think that it's really, really easy to confuse discussions about communities and who or what people are with, you know, I mean, we get charged with this constantly on Idea Channel with discussions about semantics. And that really, as Boss 1000 points out, it's about identity. It's about how people see themselves in the world, how that allows them to find people who are like them, to build a social structure around those interests or abilities or characteristics, and how that empowers them and gives them agency. And I just want to be really, really clear that that is, if you see that as an argument or a discussion about simple semantics, then to me that means you either don't know what that experience is like firsthand, or cannot appreciate someone else having to go through it. And so again, I would just encourage you, please, to like try to talk to people who have had these experiences. Try to put yourself in their shoes, or their bionic legs, as the case may be. IcyEyeG and Jon Laing and a couple other people both get into this really interesting and I think important conversation about open access technology, and in the imagined cyborgian future, especially in the one where the availability of that technology is well distributed and many different classes and types of people are able to use it, able to have access to it, are able to, you know, continue that collision that we spoke about. You know, there's this question of who owns that technology and how do you get it? And if the medical technology field as it stands right now is any indication, those technologies will be very heavily locked down, heavily protected, very private. They won't be open, and that means something. That means something in a sort of general humanistic sense of what does it mean to have even more parts of your body that you do not have direct access to. That, you know, that is true to a certain degree when you are entirely meat cage, as Rose put it, but I think it means something different and something more significant when there is external material owned by another company implanted into your body especially if you are someone who is in one of those classes of people who, you know, is affected by systematic oppression, that this is essentially a worry that it is another way for people to feel like they have to follow some social or technological norm and then suffer for it. And I think that this is a really important and really great thing to talk and think about, to have this hope and this expectation that as machine and body, as the space between those things collapse, that the machine part should be as open and publicly accessible and free, as in speech, as possible, as we could possibly do it. Fusselchen and a couple other people, I think very rightfully so, pointed out the part of the of our conversation where Rose very briefly mentioned that, you know, gender is a choice. And I don't want to put words in Rose's mouth, so I'm gonna speak from my perspective, having known Rose for several years, being a huge fan of her work and having sort of listened to and read a lot of it. I feel like it's safe to say that, you know, what Rose meant to say in that moment and what she did mean is that that you will choose your gender expression, that there is a performance that comes with gender, to, you know, use the sort of Butlerian ideas, and that is the thing that you choose, and that not to the degree that gender, especially if you are transitioning, is a choice that you're making, and that's not actually who you are, and all this other stuff. You know, that was our bad, I think, in not catching that, not putting ourselves in the position of the audience and not understanding that they would understand what Rose meant. So I want to apologize to you guys and also to Rose for not doing better at that. So sorry. Devotedpupa makes the perfect, very timely connection between cyborgs and Pokemon Go, and saying that, you know, like, what is the future of cyborgian technology as it relates to augmented reality? And I think that this is a really great and interesting question. And I think, you know, maybe we do stand on the precipice, and that Pokemon Go is in some way a start, more so than, you know, I know that Ingress and other ARGs have existed for quite a while, but that, you know, Pokemon Go sort of seems to be a much more rampant and present technological and cultural force. You know, maybe this means we stand on the precipice of a new way of looking at the world. I cannot help, as a Shadowrun GM, cannot help but think of Shadowrun and my players and their characters, all of whom have, you know, inbuilt augmented reality, like in some of their cyber eyes or whatever. And whenever we're playing, one of the things that I can't help but think is how, you know, I would totally forgive if one of the players in game is just constantly playing a sub game, like an in-game game, because that's what I would do if I had a cyber eye. I would just always have, you know, like Tetris running or Minesweeper, you know, something where you don't really have to pay attention, but every once in a while you can just go like boop. And so I guess what I'm saying is yes, please. Troj Bruegel makes the very unexpected connection, a connection that I never would have made, between cyborgs and furries, which I love because they both sort of sit in this place of trying to figure out what your ideal body is and how you can make your physical form express how you feel on the interior, and that in some ways you might do that with technology, and in some ways you might do that with, you know, a fursuit or other such things. And this was unexpected, really sort of broadened my understanding of things a little bit. So yeah, thank you, Troy. Hollandscottthomas. I love this comment. And I want to point out this comment because it does something very, very well that I feel like a lot of times I can't or shouldn't do, which is to call people out, basically. And that, you know, what this comment does is it gets to the heart of a lot of the things that we talked about in the episode. It does a really charitable reading of it. It synthesizes a lot of things that Rose and I talked about that I think I would have a hard time putting into words, having had the conversation. And also really puts all of the nonsense that happened in the comments, and that happens in every comment section on YouTube for every video where people talk about, you know, how great women are, really puts it in its place, really puts all that nonsense in its place. And, you know, I feel a lot of times like I really want to do this kind of thing, but that I can't or I shouldn't, because it's more important for me to be like a gracious host. And if I'm really like calling people out. It means that I'm the salty one, or it means that, like, you know, I don't respect people's differences when, you know, seems like most of the time they don't respect mine. And so, yeah, this struck me as like I wish I had written this comment, and I wish I had even like written this in my Evernote, and it had never seen the light of day. So I just wanted to, for the people who made it this far, and for Hollandscottthomas, if we had a comment of the year award, this might get it. Speaking of which, Zero Spin, there is a book by Simone de Beauvoir. It's called The Second Sex. It's a great book. It is a very important entry in philosophy and gender studies about what it means to be a woman. You can read that entire book to learn about how it is not the word that you use that I can't say because this is a PBS show, that women are not normal.